Hello, it's Dr. Cindy with this week's Mental Health Moment. One day, my former business partner was filling me in on her conversation with our accountant about preparing our corporate tax return, which was due in a few days. She told me they would be getting together the following week to finalize everything, and I expressed concern about missing the upcoming filing deadline. She responded, if we meet her, it should be okay, which I found confusing in light of their plan to meet after the due date. I said, I don't think that will work if you're not meeting until Monday. She answered again, if we meet her, it should be okay. I told her that didn't make sense to me. If she couldn't meet the accountant until after the filing deadline, our tax return would be late. To that, she replied, if we meet her, it should be okay. As we went back and forth in that way several more times, both of us were noticeably confused about why the other person did not understand what was being said. We just kept repeating ourselves as if saying the same thing over and over again would somehow magically convey the intended message if stated enough times. Somehow I finally realized that she wasn't saying meet her as in getting together with the accountant. She was saying meet her as in using the postage meter to postmark the envelope before the due date. It truly felt like a who's on first kind of conversation that was frustrating while it was happening, but actually pretty comical once the miscommunication was figured out. As I explained in my previous video, there are 4 parts to communication: what the speaker is trying to say, what the speaker actually says, what the listener hears, and then how the listener interprets it. That conversation with my business partner is a great example of how hearing another person's words doesn't always translate into accurately receiving and understanding the message being communicated. Hearing and listening are not necessarily the same thing. Hearing is the process of the ear taking in sound and directing it to the auditory centers of the brain. Listening entails attending to, interpreting, and comprehending what those sounds mean, which is a more active and thoughtful process. Today, I'm going to talk about this very important second part of communication, involving listening and then responding to what a speaker says in ways that facilitate connection and conflict resolution. Just as difficult emotions can interfere with how effectively a speaker communicates their intended message, so too can they disrupt how a message is interpreted and reacted to. If the words that are heard touch a sensitivity in the listener, then they will resonate with the mindset that person has about themselves. For example, a seemingly innocuous and objectively complimentary statement such as, "You look nice today," could actually trigger feelings of insecurity and self-consciousness for someone who tends to feel poorly about their appearance. Rather than appreciating the "you look nice" part of that message, they might focus on the "today" part and think, gosh, this person must think I usually don't look so good. In this case, what is intended as a positive exchange gets received and experienced negatively. It is important for all of us to be as aware as possible about what our own sensitivities and vulnerabilities are in order to try to minimize the extent to which they distort how we interpret the things that are said to us. This gets back to recognizing that a challenging reaction we have to another person represents an interaction between their behavior and our inclinations and perceptions. So when someone says something that triggers a negative emotional response, it is crucial to recognize that your internal reaction is being generated by you at least as much as, if not more than, the other person. And unless the other person is clearly, intentionally saying something overtly insulting and derogatory, it is better to assume that your hurt feelings represent you receiving the message in a manner in which it was not intended. For the sake of efficiency, our brain processes input very rapidly and interprets current experiences based on past patterns and learning. And when something registers as painful, the brain views this as a potential threat because things that cause pain tend to be dangerous. So it instantly goes on high alert and focuses on figuring out what is causing the pain so it can make it stop and restore safety. When the pain arises in the course of a conversation with another person, the options the brain gives us to fix the problem are to lash out and defend ourselves, or to withdraw and retreat emotionally or physically. Now, that might entail mentally closing ourselves off to what the other person is saying so that we are no longer fully hearing and listening to them. It could also mean ending the conversation as quickly as possible by diverting to a different topic or disengaging entirely. Hanging up on someone or leaving the room are 2 very overt conversation stoppers. Both the reflex to lash out and the impulse to retreat when we feel hurt by something another person says are clearly not conducive to effective communication or conflict resolution. When we are mindful of these as natural tendencies in difficult interactions, we are better able to take responsibility for managing and overriding these when interpersonal challenges arise. Rather than acting out from our internal emotional experiences, we can use these as information about how we are receiving and perceiving the other person's words. And the conversation can be much more effective if, instead of assuming the hurt is being caused by the other person, we first consider that we may have misheard and or misinterpreted what the person is saying. So what might that look like? Let's take the example of your partner making the comment, "This house is a mess." Now, on the surface, that's an observation they are verbalizing about how they're perceiving the condition of the living space in that moment. A matching non-defensive response to that might be, "It sure is," if you agree with their assessment. But in most cases, a comment about the house being a mess is not going to be received as an observation, but as a criticism that implies a failing on your part for the house being so messy. That would potentially trigger feelings of shame and inadequacy and feeling judged, criticized, and blamed. So then the ensuing response might be defensive. "It's not all my mess." Explanatory. "I haven't had time. It's been a busy week." Dismissive. "It's not that bad." Or angry and attacking. "Why don't you do something about it? Why is it always up to me to keep it clean?" Whether the initial comment was truly benign or was a veiled criticism, none of those responses are conducive to effective communication. Just as it is the speaker's job to communicate as clearly as possible what she or he is wanting the other person to know, it is the listener's job to communicate as clearly as possible how the message has been received. So even though technically those defensive and angry examples I just gave do give an indication of how the message was received, that way of communicating doesn't lead to collaborative conversation. So there are two important things that need to happen before responding. First one is tend to the hurt. Reflect on how you're feeling about the comment and take responsibility for your own emotional reaction. Pay attention to your impulses to defend or explain. Can you allow your partner to not like the way the house looks without feeling ashamed or inadequate? If so, then what would a response be to that keeps your feelings out of it? It might be, "Yeah, we've kind of let it go this week. Do you want to talk about a plan for how we can get it in order?" If you find that you have difficulty reframing the comment and your response to it in a non-conflictual way, and you continue to feel hurt, then the second important step is to consider how you're going to communicate that. Then the question becomes, what do I want the other person to know? That takes us back to the speaking part of communication, delivering a message that is clear and direct. Keep it simple, short, and self-focused, starting with an I statement that focuses on the reaction you are having rather than the other person's behavior. So in this scenario, that might mean saying, "I'm hearing that comment as a criticism of me." That gives your partner the opportunity to either clarify that the comment was not a criticism of you, or confirm that it was. Whichever it is, listening and responding non-defensively enables the initial intended message to be effectively communicated. Now, obviously, the ensuing conversation will vary depending on which answer is given, but at least that can proceed with a mutual understanding of what the actual issue is. If this is sounding unrealistic or impossible to do, that's completely understandable. Having reasonable, collaborative conversations are incredibly difficult when strong emotions get triggered. Depending on the intensity of feelings, that moment might not be the appropriate one in which to try to have a conversation. Being under the influence of emotions can limit effective communication just as much as being under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Sometimes the best thing you can do in such a situation is say, "I'm feeling upset right now. I need a few moments to regroup before we talk." That is actually a very respectful thing to do. Respectful of the other person, respectful of yourself, and respectful of the relationship. And during your time away, connect to your heart and get in touch with the feelings you're having. Then tend to the hurt by providing comfort and compassion to yourself for whatever emotions have been triggered. Give yourself as much time as you need to recenter. And your brain may try to hijack the process because it is primed and ready to fight. So it might pester you to go back out there and speak your mind. Stay focused on your heart and your breath. Once you have spent time with your feelings and have a better sense of where your reaction is coming from, you will be more able to sort out what part is yours based on your own insecurities and sensitivities and what part truly needs to be addressed with the other person. Then think about what the message is that you want to communicate so that person can understand what you heard and why you feel upset. That might be, I interpreted it as a criticism of me when you said the house is a mess, or I felt really angry because I thought you were blaming me. Then express openness to hearing and understanding what the other person is and isn't trying to say. I know this sounds very foreign and unfamiliar, and attempting to do this may feel awkward. If you have a person that you feel safe and comfortable with, practice these listening and responding skills with him or her about mundane things that you don't have a lot of strong emotions about. When that person speaks, listen to what is being said and contemplate how you can communicate back what you think they are saying. It sounds like, or I'm hearing you say, are both good openings for telling the other person how you are interpreting their statement. And responding in this way enables the speaker to know if the message was successfully delivered and received. Once you become more accustomed to answering in a reflective, not reflexive, way, you can then practice the more difficult work of communicating about emotional reactions. Again, starting with an I statement about how you feel and focusing on your reaction rather than the other person's words. Now, perhaps the most challenging skill of all, and therefore also the most transformative, is being able to not only listen with an open mind, but also with an open heart when someone else is upset with us. Listening with an open mind means really trying to hear and understand what the other person is telling you, apart from your own ingrained perceptions and interpretations. That enables you to respond more accurately to what the other person says. Listening with an open heart means trying to understand what emotional experience the other person is trying to communicate, separate from or despite your own internal emotional reaction. That enables you to respond more accurately to what the other person feels, which is often the deeper message that is being expressed. Communication isn't always just a verbal exchange. It is often also an emotional one, and those are the ones we tend to have the most difficulty navigating successfully. In challenging interpersonal situations, what we really want each other to know and understand is our feelings about a situation. That often doesn't get communicated directly or clearly because feelings can be difficult to talk about. And many communication failures occur because people get caught up on the words that are being used rather than the underlying emotional experience that one or both parties are trying to convey. When we listen only with our head, we are more likely to get stuck in our own mindset about ourselves and others, and are more apt to become fixated on the semantics and triggered by whatever our emotional sensitivities are. When we listen with our heart, the words the other person uses really don't matter so much because we are open to hearing and responding to the emotions they are experiencing. And that's where the communication can be transformative, because while the brain's inclination is always to protect and defend, the heart's inclination is to connect and to mend. If I were to ask any one of you if you would be concerned if someone you cared about felt hurt by your actions, I have no doubt that you would all say yes. Yet many times we fail to show that concern when someone actually tries to express their hurt feelings to us. This is partly because their message may be delivered in a way that feels accusatory or attacking, and that naturally triggers defensiveness on our part. Unfortunately, hurt often gets expressed as anger because anger is a more empowering and less vulnerable position to come from. Anger from someone causes protectiveness within us because the brain is always looking to ensure our safety. That's why it is so important to listen with your heart and not just your head. Whatever is being said to you, however it is being said, recognize that it is an expression of that person's pain. And the most appropriate response to any emotional pain is an expression of concern and compassion. Just as our own emotions get louder the longer we ignore them and try to dismiss them, the same is true for other people's emotions when they are looking for acknowledgement from us. So when we respond by trying to justify, explain, deny, defend, or dismiss their hurt, that will amplify the distress of the person we're talking to, because emotions don't respond to logic and reason, only care and compassion. And the speaker will then become more adamant and insistent in trying to get their point across. In other words, to have their feelings heard. If we're in our head and not in our heart, their insistence will add to our resistance, creating even more barriers to effective communication and conflict resolution. If you accidentally step on someone's foot, you apologize because it's an acknowledgement that you caused them pain. It doesn't matter that you didn't mean to. The foot doesn't care about your intentions, and neither do our emotions. So if someone communicates upset to you, no matter how they say it, no matter what their feeling is, whether or not you agree with or understand their reasons for being upset, acknowledge the pain. If you're not sure what to say, start with, "Oh no, you're upset, what's wrong?" That's a sincere expression of concern and of interest in knowing what is bothering the other person. And really try to listen to how the other person is feeling and respond with compassion to their hurt. "Oh, that really hurt your feelings. I'm so sorry." When we can meet people where they are emotionally, it helps them feel seen and heard, and that enables them to then participate more reasonably and calmly in further conversation. And one safe way to practice this would be to reflect on past interactions with someone who was upset with you. Imagine what you would hear and say differently if you were listening with an open heart. You can also practice this when you're watching TV. When tension or conflict arises between the characters, listen to the emotion that's being communicated and think of how you might respond from a place of compassion if you were on the receiving end of that. That might sound like a lot of work, and initially it can feel that way, just as it does with any new skill that we are learning. It is also a lot of work to get embroiled in miscommunications and misunderstandings that create conflict and emotional pain, which then requires more time and energy to recover from individually and to repair and resolve in your relationship with the other person. And note that it is the word heart, not head, that has the word here in it. Perhaps on some deeper level, we've always known that it is the heart that is the better listener of the two. Take care. Have a good week.